They laughed when the 74-year-old woman in faded jeans and a borrowed blazer stepped onto that gleaming stage, her hands trembling as she adjusted the microphone. But when the first note escaped her lips, the snickering stopped, jaws dropped, and grown men found themselves reaching for tissues they didn't know they needed. This is the extraordinary story of Dorothy Mae Thompson, a grandmother from small-town Nebraska who shattered every assumption about age, dreams, and the power of a voice that refused to stay silent any longer. Dorothy had carried her secret for 7 decades. Born in 1950 in the rural farming community of Millfield, Nebraska, she discovered her gift at age 6 while singing alone in her family's barn. The old wooden beam seemed to vibrate with her voice, and even the chickens would stop pecking to listen. But when her stern father, Harold, caught her singing instead of collecting eggs, his response crushed something delicate inside her young heart. Harold Thompson was a practical man who believed children should be seen and not heard, especially daughters who needed to learn their place in the world. Music was foolishness, he declared. Dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. Dorothy's mother, quiet and worn down by years of keeping peace, never dared contradict her husband's iron rules. So Dorothy learned to sing in silence. She hummed while hanging laundry on a line, whispered melodies while walking to school, and let her voice soar only when she was completely alone in the vast cornfields that stretched beyond their property. Those fields became her concert hall, the rustling stalks her only audience. At 18, Dorothy married Eugene Thompson, a general mechanic who owned a small garage on Main Street. Eugene was kind but completely tone-deaf, and when Dorothy occasionally hummed while cooking dinner, he'd smile politely and change the subject. She gave birth to 3 children, Patricia, James, and little Rebecca, and found herself pouring all her suppressed music into bedtime lullabies sung so softly that even her own children barely heard them. The decades blurred together in a haze of school fundraisers, church potlucks, and family gatherings where Dorothy always volunteered to organize but never perform. She watched from the sidelines as other people took center stage at community events, her heart aching with a longing she couldn't name. Eugene passed away when she was 67, leaving Dorothy alone in their small house with nothing but memories and the songs she'd never shared. Her children, now adults with busy lives in Denver and Chicago, worried about their mother's increasing isolation. Patricia, a successful marketing executive, suggested Dorothy join the local senior center to make friends. But when Dorothy arrived at the Millfield Community Center that first Tuesday morning, she felt more invisible than ever. The other women her age seemed to have established their cliques decades ago. They talked about grandchildren's achievements, prescription medications, and who had died recently. Dorothy sat in the corner during their coffee socials, smiling politely when spoken to but feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Everything changed the day Brenda Walsh, the center's new activities coordinator, announced they were starting a seniors talent show for the annual Harvest Festival. The room buzzed with excitement as women discussed their plans. Margaret would recite poetry, Helen would display her quilts, and several others planned to perform together in a comedy skit. Brenda's eyes landed on Dorothy, who had remained silent throughout the discussion. There was something about this quiet woman that intrigued her, a depth that seemed to hide behind those gentle brown eyes. "Dorothy, what about you? Do you have any hidden talents you'd like to share?" The room fell silent. Dorothy felt every pair of eyes turned toward her, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to politely decline, the way she had for 74 years. But something different happened. Maybe it was the way Brenda asked with genuine curiosity, rather than polite obligation. Maybe it was a sudden realization that she had spent nearly 3/4 of a century hiding the most beautiful part of herself. I used to sing a little," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The response was immediate and devastating. Martha Coleman, the unofficial queen of the senior center, let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, honey, that's sweet, but the talent show is for people who can actually perform in front of crowds. It's not really for beginners." Several other women nodded in agreement. "Maybe you could help with decorations instead," suggested another, "or sell tickets at the door." Dorothy felt a familiar sting of dismissal, the same feeling she'd carried since childhood. She was about to nod and retreat into her safe corner when Brenda intervened. "Actually, I think it's a wonderful idea. The deadline for sign-ups is Friday. Dorothy, if you'd like to participate, I'll put your name down. That night, Dorothy sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the phone. Part of her wanted to call Brenda and withdraw from the talent show. Who was she kidding? She was a 74-year-old woman who had never performed for anyone except cornfields and empty houses. But another part of her, a part that had been buried for decades, whispered that maybe this was her chance. She walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a small wooden box she hadn't opened in years. Inside, yellow with age, were song lyrics she had written as a teenager, dreams preserved in ink but never given voice. Her fingers traced the faded words of a song called Fields of Gold, inspired by those long-ago afternoons singing to the Nebraska corn. The next morning, Dorothy called her daughter Patricia in Denver. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Patricia's voice crackled through the phone, filled with loving concern. "I mean, it sounds wonderful, but what if it doesn't go well? Those people can be pretty judgmental." Dorothy understood her daughter's worry. Patricia had inherited her father's practical nature and spent her career managing risks and minimizing potential disasters. But for the first time in decades, Dorothy felt something stronger than fear. "Sweetheart, I've spent my whole life worried about what might go wrong. Maybe it's time I found out what might go right." The weeks leading up to the talent show became a secret journey of rediscovery. Dorothy would drive to the empty parking lot behind the abandoned grain elevator on the edge of town, roll down her windows, and sing to the prairie sky. Her voice, unused to such freedom, cracked and wavered at first. But gradually, like a flower remembering how to bloom after a long winter, something beautiful began to emerge. She chose to perform Amazing Grace, a song that carried her through Eugene's death and countless quiet sorrows. But she would sing it her way, with the raw honesty of someone who had truly been lost and found. The morning of the Harvest Festival arrived gray and drizzly, matching Dorothy's nervous mood. She stood in her bedroom, tried to decide between her navy dress and the borrowed blazer Patricia had sent from Denver. Her hands shook as she applied a touch of lipstick, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. At the community center, the atmosphere was electric with excitement. Families filled the folding chairs, and local teenagers operated borrowed sound equipment. Dorothy watched from backstage as the other performers took their turns. Margaret delivered her poetry with confidence. Helen's quilt display received enthusiastic applause, and the comedy skit had the audience laughing heartily. Then Brenda announced, "Our final performer tonight is Dorothy Thompson, who will be singing for us." The audience's reaction was immediate and crushing. Dorothy heard the whispers, saw the smirks, felt the collective assumption that this would be the awkward moment everyone would politely endure before heading to the refreshment table. As she walked onto the stage, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, someone in the back actually chuckled. The sound cut through her like a blade, and for a moment, she considered turning around and walking away. The microphone seemed impossibly tall, the audience impossibly large, and her dream impossibly foolish. But then she thought about that 6-year-old girl singing to chickens in a Nebraska barn. She thought about all the songs that had lived inside her, growing stronger even in silence. She thought about Eugene, who had loved her gentle nature, and her children, who deserved to see their mother chase something that made her soul sing. Dorothy adjusted the microphone with trembling hands and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Some were kind, some were skeptical, and some were already checking their phones. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath that seemed to reach all the way down to her toes, and began to sing. The first note that emerged from Dorothy Thompson's lips that October evening was nothing short of magical. It was clear and pure and filled with 7 decades of stored emotion. The chattering stopped instantly. Phone screens went dark. Even the teenagers working the sound booth froze in place. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Her voice carried the weight of every loss, every disappointment, Every moment she had chosen silence over song. But it also carried something else, a crystalline beauty that seemed to transform the very air in the room. People who had been slouching in their chairs sat up straight. Children stopped fidgeting. Elderly men who hadn't cried since their own father's funerals found tears sliding down their weathered cheeks. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. As Dorothy sang, something extraordinary happened. The audience didn't just hear her voice, they felt it in their bones. This wasn't performance. It was a revelation. Here was a woman who had hidden her light under a bushel for 3/4 of a century, and now that light was blazing with the intensity of 7 decades of suppressed dreams. When she reached the final note, holding it with control that would have impressed conservatory graduates, the silence that followed was profound. For a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3, nobody moved. Then, like a dam bursting, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. But this wasn't polite applause. This was the kind of ovation reserved for moments that change people's understanding of what's possible. Grown men stood up, tears streaming down their faces. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Even Martha Coleman, who had dismissed Dorothy weeks earlier, was on her feet, her face wet with tears she couldn't explain. Dorothy stood frozen at the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite clapping at best, embarrassed silence at worst. She had never imagined this. An entire community transformed by the voice she had been convinced wasn't worth hearing. As the applause continued, Dorothy's daughter Patricia pushed through the crowd. She had driven all night from Denver after realizing she couldn't miss this moment. When she reached her mother, she was sobbing. "Mom," she whispered, wrapping Dorothy in a fierce embrace. I had no idea you could. Why didn't you ever?" Dorothy held her daughter close, understanding that Patricia was grieving not just a performance she had almost missed, but for all the years of music that had been hidden away like a family secret. The local newspaper's photographer, who had come expecting to snap a few pictures of quilts and poetry readings, found himself capturing what would become the most shared image in the county's history. Dorothy Thompson, age 74, standing at the microphone with tears of joy streaming down her face, her arms outstretched as if embracing the entire world. But the story doesn't end with that one magical evening. Word of Dorothy's performance spread through social media like wildfire. Someone had recorded the performance on their phone, and within days, the video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from around the world. From young people inspired by her courage, from other seniors who decided it wasn't too late to chase their dreams, from professional singers who recognized a rare gift that had been hiding in plain sight for 7 decades. Record labels called. Television producers reached out. Dorothy found herself invited to perform on national morning shows, her story becoming a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they were too old, too inexperienced, or too ordinary to pursue their dreams. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Dorothy's transformation was how it rippled through her community. Other seniors at the community center began sharing their own hidden talents. Margaret, inspired by Dorothy's courage, started a poetry group that performed at local coffee shops. Helen began teaching quilting classes to young mothers who wanted to learn traditional crafts. The annual Harvest Festival Talent Show became a celebrated regional event, drawing people from neighboring states who came hoping to witness another Dorothy Thompson moment, that magical instant when someone steps fully into who they were always meant to be. Dorothy still lives in her small house on Maple Street in Millfield, Nebraska. At 77 now, she performs regularly at nursing homes, church services, and community events throughout the Midwest. She's recorded an album of hymns and folk songs that became a surprise bestseller, with proceeds going to support music programs in rural schools. When young people ask her how she found the courage to sing after decades of silence, Dorothy always gives the same answer. "I realized that my voice was never really mine to keep quiet. It was a gift meant to be shared, and I had been selfish by hiding it away. The world needs your song, whatever it is. Don't wait until you're 74 to let people hear it." Dorothy's story reminds us that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Age doesn't diminish our capacity for greatness. It often reveals it. Every person carries within themselves something beautiful that the world needs to experience. The tragedy isn't in being too old to start, It's in being too afraid to begin. Your voice matters. Your dreams have value. Your age is not a limitation. It's the accumulation of all the wisdom, experience, and depth that will make your contribution to this world uniquely powerful. Dorothy Thompson was 74 when she first stepped onto that stage, but she was exactly the right age to teach us all what courage sounds like when it finally finds its voice.